And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you mean by genealogies of knowledge and politics of citation. Like I hear that term politics of citation around. It's on your website. I think it's worth spending a little time kind of exploring that. What does it mean to you and why is it so important? Maybe this time we could start with Whitney.
Sure. I, I do think that citations are political, right? And sometimes it is true that we might approach them in an apolitical manner. We're not really even cognizant of these things that we are replicating. But, over time, who is assigned on the syllabus and therefore who is constructed in the canon has been from a lineage of white patriarchy and white men. So in sociology, my discipline has forever said that Du Bois, Weber, and Durkheim are the canon. And finally, we had a revolution, and sorry, I don't know if I said Du Bois, Durkheim, Weber, um,
Marx.
Marx, and then now Du Bois is. But there's still not space for women in that canon, and not Black women, who we know were really influential in the Atlantic sociology area. And so, as coming in as an undergrad student and then a graduate student, and then we're tasked to teach these same classes, we oftentimes are just replicating that lineage, but haven't critiqued that lineage. And so
Mhm.
we say lineage all the time as a revision to that thing, but have to do more work in order to broaden out who we want to represent in those ideas. And so I think lineage is always a part of everybody's conversation. Sometimes they just point to us to say, you're doing this work, but everybody's doing it in a way that like should be, I think, more critiqued and expanded and revised over time. Um, I mean, I also think we have an opportunity to think about citations and as a political praxis in terms of now I think we have a moment where we're trying to figure out what it means to think about the producers of knowledge as also individuals. And some of these individuals sometimes create harm. And so,
Mhm.
we have folks who have tons of citations and maybe they were called out as an abuser. What is our politics and how we want to cite and engage them? Those are conversations that I think we should have because it is always political. And I think really when you are trying to take an apolitical stance, you're just being sort of ignorant or complicit in that. And so to intervene in that way is taking a stance that is political, and there is a political like citation praxis that we are encouraging people to do to really disrupt the sort of taken for granted ways of doing things, to say that we can do better, and to acknowledge that there are so many scholars who have been producing really, really important frameworks, data, biographies that haven't had their place in understanding, like their place named in understanding how we're even thinking about the work that we're doing.
Thanks. Daisy or Yasmin, do you have thoughts about this?
Can you repeat the question once? I want to make sure I got exactly the politics
Um,
of citation.
I wanted to know either what you mean about it or what do you think the
What I mean to think
significance
about it.
is of these ideas, politics of citation and genealogies of knowledge.
I mean, part of it is thinking about the nature of like deciding who we honor, because we don't always read everything, but we read things and we make choices about what we read, right? And while there may not be, I think this when he's getting at some idea of like a political kind of position people think they have, but they're still making choices. Those choices are framed within a system that invisibilizes certain people and doesn't others. Then we reify ideas about who is creating this knowledge, about who the originators are, and also at times distort what they're saying. Like in citation, people think, okay, I'll just add an extra reference, and then they read somebody else's reference of that reference, and rather than actually engaging the work, and engaging the meaning of that work and the contributions of that work. It's like, okay, I get students who tell me all this stuff and they're studying intersectionality, have never read Black feminist thought, have never read like some of the actual work that is laid the foundation for understanding it or the lineage or the history of where it comes from. And so when I think about the politics of citation, I also think about the extent that like who we engage and the amount of investment and time and how we engage them when we
Mm,
think about incorporating them into our work, the extent to which we honor their own words by engaging their own knowledge production rather than just a repetition of that or later frameworks of that, or and also the extent to which we break out of patterns of the greatest hits. You know, like in certain fields, there'll be the people and they're the greatest hits of something, and then everyone just cites them over and over again. And some of the concerns I have with is thinking about harm is that we discover sometimes that later on they've really taken other people's work. And because people weren't gauging work more broadly and reading more broadly, it kind of repeat the same things, right? And in the process, voices are lost and people don't realize when they do that. And sometimes I've seen people say, well, I don't have the time to engage. And I go, and what happens when people don't have the time to engage you?
mm,
Because you too want to be heard in what you're producing and what you're creating, but that lack of intentionality in engaging in a praxis of that actually engages the work and that reads more broadly and outside of the canon, outside of the greatest hits, well, can it reproduce? We reproduce our own kind of harm and exclusion in that process.
mm,
I'd briefly like to add, well, extend the pattern as someone that comes from African diaspora studies that was a former student and has and dabbles, dips in and out of anthropology. The greatest hits ends with Fanon. And it's just like he has been turned every which way but loose. And then there are people that have cited him over and over that we're not reading now
Mhm.
in 2025. So, as a junior scholar, my question is what happens if we start with Fanon instead of ending with him? And where do we put the newer scholars in the syllabus? Because I don't want to wait to read Black feminist anthropology until week 13 of a social cultural anthropology class. We should start with them. What happens when we start at a different point of these intersections that's not with the Savage slot? You can read that in the other class, but I don't want to start with that violence in my class. I did that already, so you don't have to.
mm.
So that's how I'm seeing like the politics of my citation. I want to cite across. I know there's different people reading it, and then my mentor Kristen Smith has said that a syllabus is like your thesis. So what am I doing with Black feminist indigeneity? What does indigeneity means? And how do I have people understand indigeneity outside the United States, outside of being rooted in the United States? So it's not just the politics of citation of who we're citing, but where are we citing from? Because we can talk about indigeneity and fully have a class that's just from the United States. And that's not a hemispheric conversation. That's just a United Stater conversation. So within that politics, we could still be trying to be diverse and still cause harm, especially when dealing with Latin America, um, the Caribbean, and the rest of the global South,
Mhm.
because the global South is more than just South America. So I use that as a politics. What if we just start with the Black greatest hits or with women in general?
Yeah,
Just start and stay there.
from margin to center.